Astell Kern is a name that holds a bit of a special place for me, as the first proper audio product that I ever owned was the T10 MP3 player from iRiver, the parent company of Astell Kern. So when Astell Kern reached out to me asking if I'd like to take a look at their new flagship product, the Sp3000, I couldn't really say no. I've had a couple months with the Sp3000. I even took it on the trip to Munich, and before we even start to talk about sound quality, I have got to talk about the user experience, because that is absolutely the standout aspect of this device. Firstly, the battery life has been excellent, comfortably getting through an entire day before running out of juice, and even when that happens, fast charging capability, Quick Charge 3.0, means that getting it topped up again doesn't take long at all. The display is 1920 by 1080, which on a device this size is excellently crisp, and the colours really stand out quite a bit on this, more so than other devices I've tried, which that's not something I've usually thought about with DAPs, but on this, it just made browsing my library that little bit nicer, so it's a small thing, but well done Astell Kern. The software on this DAP though is what I'm loving the most. Now, it's not running a stock Android, it is running a heavily modified and streamlined version of it, which I imagine helps with achieving that excellent battery life. And in combination with the 8-core Snapdragon processor, provides an excellently snappy and responsive experience. You can of course load your own files onto the DAP to play back through the native player software, but it also comes with a customized version of Tidal that allows you to stream music and bypass the Android resampling issue. If that's not enough, there's a selection of approved apps that you can download, including the other major streaming services and Roon Arc. Speaking of Roon, if you are a Roon user, one of the coolest features about this DAP is that you can use it as a Roon endpoint. Just turn it on, it shows up in Roon, and away you go, including properly controlling the DAP's own volume control through Roon. The only downside to using it in this mode is that it is an endpoint, so you've got basic controls for moving around in the track, play, pause, skip, that sort of stuff, but you can't actually go and browse through your library. You've got to do that with whatever device you are using as your Roon remote. Regardless, this is actually the main way in which I use this DAP, because no matter where I am at home or at my office, I can just slip it into my pocket and then control everything else from my phone with full access to my entire library and suggestions from Roon Radio. If I was taking this out and about where it's not a phone, so it doesn't have a cellular data connection, I would either just use local files loaded onto the SD card if I wanted every ounce of audio quality that I could get, or, to be honest, I found myself using Bluetooth a lot. This can act as an LDAC Bluetooth receiver, and given how close in quality LDAC Bluetooth in particular is to just normal bit perfect playback, as well as the fact that the convenience factor of, again, just leaving it in my pocket, doing everything from my phone was really nice to have, I found myself doing that a lot more when I was out of the house. It really is an incredibly full-featured device and just an absolute joy to use no matter how you choose to use it. Bluetooth, streaming, Roon, local files, USB, whatever, it all just works, it's smooth, it's seamless, it's responsive. I love the software on this DAP. For me personally, that Roon endpoint was the best feature though, just because even when I was at my desk, I didn't even need to plug it in and use it as a USB DAC, which it can also do, because it was already connected to Roon wirelessly, so I could just use it on my computer, and this was already up and running. I've reviewed other DAPs in the past, like the Luxury and Precision P6 Pro, which whilst the sound quality was absolutely terrific, it is not even in the same league as this when it comes to how nice it is to actually use. The software on this is just 10 steps ahead. The only part about the software which I didn't like was the EQ. Now, you can use a graphic equalizer or you can go for a proper parametric one, but if you do, you have to scroll sideways to adjust each band independently, and you can't see the big picture of how your profile is changing the frequency response. That part did feel, quite frankly, very clunky, but if you are a Roon user, then you can use the Roon or Roon Arc EQ interface, which is far better. Looking at the Sp3000, you can't help but admire how good it looks. The body is constructed from 904L steel, which is the same material used by many high-end watch manufacturers such as Rolex. The volume crown is encircled by a glowing ring, the back is glass with a geometric pattern, and everything just looks so good until you touch it. It looks so good, and honestly I dread to think how much it cost just to make the body of this device. It can't have been cheap, but it's a fingerprint magnet, and so unfortunately so much of that aesthetic goodness is lost unless you are obsessively polishing the damn thing. The solution to this, which also unfortunately hides most of the body, is to use the included case, which is quite a nice one. It's a goatskin case. Without the case, the SP3000 also has some pretty sharp corners which do dig into your palms a little bit, so the case does also help from an ergonomic standpoint, but I just can't help but wish that the device didn't need it, that the case wasn't effectively mandatory. It would have been a lot better if the fingerprints and ergonomics weren't an issue just on the device by itself. Additionally, the playback buttons, whilst totally fine with the device naked, are a little bit hard to find when you put the case on, so finding what you're pressing without actually looking at the device can be a frustration. The volume crown, as well as looking probably the best I've seen on a DAP, with that deep jeweled shape and the illuminated ring around it, feels tactile and sturdy, and the volume controller itself is precise when using the crown and easy to make larger adjustments using the touchscreen if you need. For I/O, there's the aforementioned microSD card slot and a USB-C port that handles charging, file transfer, and allows the SP3000 to act as a USB DAC. Then at the top, we have the single-ended and balanced headphone outputs. Internally, this is using not one, not two, not three, but 4 of AKM's latest flagship chip, the 4499EX, plus 2 of the 4191EQ digital processing chips that accompany them. So you're not just getting a shiny box, you are getting some serious hardware. But how does it sound? Subjectively, I've really enjoyed my time with the SP3000. I've mostly been evaluating it as a portable source for IEMs at various price points, such as the Hi-Fi-Man Svanar or the Truth-Ear Red, but I've also run it with various over-ear headphones and have used it as a dedicated DAC in my speaker setup to really put it through its paces. And the summary is that if you are using this specifically for IEMs, this is truly phenomenal. It is flat out one of the best sources for IEMs I have ever heard, and I want one. But if you are using it for full-size headphones, particularly things like planars or harder to drive headphones in general, or if you're using it as a dedicated DAC, things do start to change a bit, and I'll talk about that in a sec. There is also a full set of measurements for the SP3000 up on the audiophile section of headphones.com. There's a link to that in the description. And I should say, I always do my entire subjective evaluation before I measure things so that the measurements don't bias what I'm hearing. Let's start with IEM use. The SP3000 is, from a detail and overall technical standpoint, absolutely terrific. The incredibly high dynamic range, even at low output levels, means that for IEMs, you get absolutely no perceivable noise floor, and presuming nothing in your environment or the IEMs themselves is limiting it, an exceptionally detailed result. The overall sound to my ear is slightly relaxed compared to neutral, not what I'd call coloured necessarily, but definitely just taking the edge off things, particularly sibilance in tracks like Undercover Martin by Two Door Cinema Club, where the vocals can on some chains lean towards being a little bit too sharp, and on this it just smooths that edge out a little bit. But whilst this does mean that for some tracks, particularly percussion-heavy acoustic genres or faster electronic things like Do You Don't You by Haywire, things weren't quite as snappy as I would have liked ideally. It could have been just a little bit harder hitting on that leading edge. Other genres like orchestral music absolutely shined on this device. And this was due both to the fact that the SP3000 gives a slightly richer than real life timbre, which for genres like that just make it a lot more immersive, but also how good the spatial presentation was. That's a really standout aspect that this does exceptionally well. Imaging, sense of direction was just laser precise, and things were separated physically from each other in amongst the soundstage better than a lot of other, even desktop DACs that I've tried. It kind of reminded me of R2R in that regard, because it just felt like you could reach out and touch stuff. It was really tactile, I think is the best word for it. And as to why it sounds like this, well, there's a couple measured behaviors which might point towards an answer. When it comes to how hardware might limit spatial presentation, that's primarily going to be down to two things. The first is just timing accuracy, which the SP3000 has practically perfect jitter performance. It is absolutely outstanding and beats a lot of, in fact, most desktop class products. So well done, Astell Kern, for that. And secondly, how much of the left channel bleeds into the right channel and vice versa? Are you just getting what is supposed to be coming through each channel, or is there some crosstalk going on between the two? And the crosstalk on the SP3000 is below minus 130 decibels at all times. So again, well done, Astell Kern. That's quite a feat, particularly in a device this small. As to that slight softening aspect of things, that could be due to one of or the combination of the facts that distortion on this device does change, both with frequency, getting higher as you go above about 3 kHz and below about 500 Hz, and also versus level. There's a bit of a hump where higher output signals distort more. So A kick drum, for example, which is primarily a high frequency transient on the leading edge and then low frequency sort of body of the instrument, and it's high level, all three of those things mean that it's going to distort more than just general mid-range content, vocals for example. So that could be why certain aspects do sound a little bit softened on this, even though actual detail retrieval is far from an issue at all. I've got to reiterate that that effect is quite subtle. It's noticeable when you directly compare against something else, but you don't listen to this and go, oh, this sounds soft. It doesn't. It's not a smoothed over or soft sounding device. It's just slightly more relaxed compared to a true neutral reference, as I'd say. When it comes to driving full-size headphones, it really is going to depend on how sensitive your headphones are. The Sp3000 is quite clearly aimed towards IEM users. It is optimized for a low noise floor, high dynamic range at low signal level outputs, not for high power output. It'll deliver about 0.2 watts into 32 ohms. So if you're a planar headphone enjoyer, this probably isn't going to be an ideal choice for you, and you might want to look at something more optimized and designed towards high power output, not so much the high dynamic range like this is. For high impedance and dynamic driver headphones, it does, as mentioned, just depend on how sensitive they are. There are a lot of dynamic driver headphones that sound great on this. The Sennheiser HD800S was a wonderful pairing, but it really depends on how much you have to turn things up. If you have to start turning things toward the maximum, it really does start to lose performance. It starts to close in, it starts to sound less airy, it starts to sound quite a bit softer. It's just not the same experience. And so I would recommend going and using our headphone power calculator to work out how much voltage you need to get your headphones to about 100 or 110 dB. If you're wondering why I'm saying you should put 100 or 110 into the calculator instead of just 85 dB, who's listening at 110 decibels? Well, go and watch our Do I Need an Amplifier video, which answers that question. It's a bit of a common misconception. But the answer is that if you need about a volt or more to get your headphones to that level, you should probably look for something else, because that's the point where this really does start to struggle. But if you need less than a volt, or considerably less than a volt, this is going to be an absolutely terrific device for running your headphones. Do you want to know what else is great? A full 365-day return policy when you buy this or any other wiggly air making machine available at headphones.com. Interestingly, I did also notice that when measuring the device, it's not just the level of harmonic distortion that changes as you go up in signal level. The structure of that harmonic distortion changes too. So as you go up in level, as well as the harmonic distortion getting higher, the order of harmonics is higher, which means that they are also more audible. So whilst this may not be the ideal choice for those wanting to run exclusively full-size headphones, or if you're wanting to use it as a dedicated DAC, unless you're wanting to turn down the output level, in which case it performs excellently just as a DAC. Based on sound quality alone, I would love to get one of these for myself to use with IEMs, but what really sets this apart is how much of a pleasure it is to actually use. The UI and software features just make it so streamlined and pleasant to use for local files, streaming, Roon, USB, Bluetooth, anything. You can use it in any way you like, and it just works. It's snappy, it's beautiful, it's responsive, and for IEM users looking for an endgame portable source, I'd struggle to find a reason not to pick the Sp3000. Hopefully you found that video interesting and useful, and if you've got any further questions, come and leave them on the Headphones.com Discord server or the Headphones.com forum, and I and other wiggly air enthusiasts will endeavour to help. Until next time, thanks for watching.